Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening wherever you are. Thank you again for listening to another podcast on Talk Architecture. I'm your host, Naziaty Mohd Yaacob. This episode is a continuation of the previous episode on the Design Thesis, which is a crucial year for the graduating architect. The design thesis is something that I would like to talk about because I have been thinking about this ever since I did it in 1990. I am not joking. I've been always interested in this year because it was a significant event for me, and I find it to be the most fascinating year in all the architecture education of a person taking architecture course. What I would like to talk about is similar to what Haruki Murakami was trying to talk about when he talks about running. He runs marathon, and in this book, what I talk about when I talk about running, he describes how running is important and how it is associated with him writing his novels. And this is what I'm going to do. In this episode, I am going to talk about what I talk about when I talk about the design thesis. It's not about architecture education of the 5 years, but it's that particular 1 year. Now, I could talk about architecture education, but that is too, shall I say, general to that'll be not focused as much as what I would like to say with regard to design thesis. And I think this is the right time, after considering all sorts of conversation that we have had with various parties, fresh graduates, professional architects, and we will continue talking about this really. But there is one foregone conclusion about how the design thesis need to be approached, need to be done. And that is to collaborate with someone from the industry. Well and good, one would argue that the academic is good enough. But academic now is focus on the key performance indicators that his or her or the university imposed on them, and every waking hour, every day, working day at least, or working time, they are reminded of that, of writing journals, of supervising students, of getting more postgraduate students to supervise administrative work, which is secondary actually, but it's more to do with getting grants, getting projects. That is the work of the academic, and that is their preoccupation most of the time. The supervision or the coaching of the student of architecture is, shall I say, down in the packing order. It's least prioritized. Now, of course, there are exceptions, but this is the norm. The norm is that the academic has other ambitions. Coaching or supervising an undergraduate, or in this case, a master's student who's doing the professional course, or the course that will take them to be a professional, is down there at the level of the least priority. And when it's the least priority, there is limitation to the academic being able to collaborate with the student. Now, this episode, if I'm going to do it like Haruki Murakami's book, I mean, this is not a book, but the way that he talks about is he gave a scenario on how he came about to be running at the beginning, and then he ran in marathons later on. So it has to do with the kind of focus that he had to have when he runs marathon, and the kind of practice, the kind of pain. You can have pain, it's inevitable, but suffering is not. That sort of that sort of quotation that he got in the book was something that intrigued me. But what does that have to do, that term, that quote, have to do with architecture education? It has to do with the mentality. The growth mentality would be what we want student of architecture to acquire, and anyone to acquire actually. The growth mentality is that there will be challenges, and how you face this challenges is important. There'll be pain in terms of pain is something that's uncomfortable, yeah, something that everyone could experience. It is part of human nature to feel uncomfortable with something, and then how to deal with being uncomfortable to get happiness and fulfillment at the end of the day. You don't want to keep on suffering with the pain, and that's one of the worst things to do. So that's what Haruki Murakami wanted to explain when he talked about running. And in his context, running has all sorts of pain, but not to suffer means you have to have that discipline and the belief to engage with your mind and body, and in this respect, the focus on achieving it, the whole thing, the magic, the just is, will make him able to do running again and again from day to day. The day to day is of importance. So if we are to think about the day to day and learning and enriching ourselves and not getting stuck, in essence, design thesis, that 1 year could be hell for a student of architecture. It could be that there is no energy, or the lack of energy or lack of ideas, getting stuck on a problem. And someone from the industry who is understand what a design thesis is, someone who is interested in academia, fresh, they're not bogged down by, it used to be that academics are not bogged down by architectural academics. It used to be that architectural academics, in the tradition of many schools of architecture, we like to refer to the AA during Alvin Boyarsky's time, or maybe even now, in many schools of architecture all over the world. We have people coming from the industry interested in teaching, coaching students of architecture. That is very fresh. There is some sort of a sense of balance there in terms of the coaching. It's not like tedious or you don't want someone preoccupied with other things and not about architecture and designing. We used to say that the academician must be a designer. Okay, if the academician is allowed to practice architecture, that's not many. That's not many at all. And if it's not the priority of the university does not understand that architecture lecturers need to be in practice, then, it's a dilemma. It's something that is a problem that needs to be rectified in the academic world. So this is the most obvious thing that we notice in Malaysian schools of architecture, and why architect Lok Wee was mentioning about in Malaysia there is no paradigm shift. There is no looking at this. There is no urgency to look at this. Now, because I was interested, now we're coming to the part where I'm going to talk what I talk about when I talk about design thesis. That was a long introduction just now. I'm trying to put the context in so that what I'm going to say next makes sense. I've been interested in design thesis since the 1990 when in 1990 to 91 I did my design thesis at North London Polytechnic, and the title of my project was the Quranic Studies Institute. I was into Islamic Sufism and was reading a lot on that, and I had my own personal spiritual journey then. And I always had a passion or a penchant to institutional or educational buildings. So that's the building type. And I found a site. I had to justify relocating the existing building on that site because the site is very suitable to my experimentation or the required size of the building. They did not specify, North London Polytechnic, they did not specify exactly the size, but we knew that 2,500 square meters and above would be good enough to do a design thesis. So after several searches, I found that is the best site because it's a site where people walk from the tube station to the Regent's Mosque. On the way, the site is on the way, in between, and that area, although there's quite a residential presence in that area, the Regent's Park area. There are shops and commercial and institutional buildings as well. I kind of like that area, and after much search, previously there were other sites, one near the London Eye. At that time you don't have the London Eye, but the festival, it's kind of long time now. I'm trying to remember, at the bank of the River Thames. Was it Thames? Okay. And there were several sites that I was debating And I knew that the site has to be quite institutional. But we had supervisor system then. What I'm trying to say is that the design thesis made an impression to me because of many things. It was not only about completing the project, but I had to deal with my personal life or my living condition at that time as well, and my relationship with my housemates, and the encroachment of space by my housemates' family, and how I had to deal with all those emotions and inconveniences. At that time, at that age, my late 20s, we have our own emotional journey or other issues to do with relationships, and really all I needed to concentrate is on the thesis. Now, that is quite common. I mean, a human being doing a design thesis, having to cope with other issues in their life, and those are also part of the challenges, apart from the obvious challenge of finishing the design thesis. But I also had an architectural challenge, or trying to identify myself as a designer. And this has been something that I recognize is happening throughout all the years. I started since I was 18 doing the diploma course in Malaysia and continuing my architecture journey as a young adult in my 20s and culminating in finishing my part 2 at the North London Polytechnic. So the design thesis is kind of a pivotal moment where I kind of gained confidence to want to do architecture practice after that, because I was looking at my identity as the architect. But when I returned, after the design thesis, I did 1 year, but the problem was there was recession in London, and I did not do architecture practice that normally people would do. I did more of interior design for a branding company, a design company. So when I went back, I suppose that this is a bit of a setback. And when I went back to Malaysia, I tried to get into practice, but I think my momentum was a bit lost, and it didn't turn out well. The practice that I was in, and but also in the back of my mind, I wanted to be an academic. So in a way, I'm that population, the percentage that did not really pursue traditional architecture path, but always was a dilemma for me right until even when I, in my mid-30s, when I finally decided to be in academia, but the sort of academic that is practicing as well in academia. It was easier then to do so because there's less emphasis on university ranking, and what's happening now in academia is, coupled with other things, other factors, make it much more difficult for a person to be interested to maintain themselves in architecture course, because there are also statistics that, when during my time, 60% would end up pursuing the traditional architecture route, but during certain batches, people who are in the ages of 35, when they recollected their batchmates, maybe 30% or less actually pursued the traditional architecture route. So in the previous episode, I mentioned about the percentages based on word of mouth, or based on what we perceive to be the percentages of how many people end up being in the architecture industry in the usual route, and we quote it as 30%, and the sizable one goes into the periphery. So in order to teach those going to the traditional route, then you need to have people experience in that, like the industry. People come from the industry. So the design thesis being, after 4 years, you start on a 1 year of a journey in discovering yourself. The sort of person who is coaching a design thesis student is someone who knows that the discovery, the learning of a potential graduate architect is crucial at that moment, in a way that they're creating a momentum of being interested in that identity as becoming an architect. Obviously, not necessarily everyone will be the architect, but that potential, that thought has been in their mind. So we're giving what do you call it, dignity. No, we're giving a presence. We're giving the chance to nurture that possibility that that person will be pursuing the traditional architecture route. We have seen very good student at that point doing a design thesis that had enriched them, because it's proven that it had enriched them and they found themselves. But later on in life, at the age of early 30s, they decided to take another route, because life circumstance does not guarantee that you're going to be taking the traditional architecture route. Now, personally, I've always been taking the traditional architecture route. I've always been interested in design as practice, not design as just an academic exercise. It's my viewpoint that eventually those who are my students would end up taking that route. I did not coach anyone to be a generalist. I did not coach anyone to be a filmmaker or interior designer or anything else. Now, when you talk about interior designer, that's still to do with design, obviously. But no, this is the exact path. This is the path that people go into architecture industry, being the person that is leading the consultants team. I'm not talking about the subsidiary or the other industries that is relating to the architecture industry, or the smaller industries or the accompanying industries such as interior design. I'm not talking about that. So when we coach someone who will lead the team, will be a leader in architecture, this is exactly what I'm saying. So in design thesis, in beginning, when I was teaching in where I taught in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, I did not get into being the design thesis coordinator. It took a while in my experience in the university, in the School of Architecture, before I actually get to be one. It was after I did my PhD, and that means around 2008. In 2008, it's like something about 11 years after I started teaching in that university, and after my PhD, I became a design thesis coordinator. And we usually have about 3 people from the industry in our team. And straight away, I saw the necessity. I had to assume the role as the design consultant. And because I was still, in a way, practicing design, but not in the full traditional way, but with different projects I was doing, I saw the need for the student to gain confidence. And the way we conducted design thesis at that time, with the agreement of the team of studio lecturers or tutors. That's me as a full-time lecturer, and we have a team of 3 other lecturers, and including Kevin Mountlow with 2 others. There's usually no other full-time lecturers. There's only me. And I have been doing that since whenever I'm involved in the studio at the design thesis level, whether it's 24 people or whether it's 10 people, because let me explain, from 24 to 10, 24 was the number of student intake at that time for Bachelor of Architecture Part 2. And I dealt with all 24 with the help of the team of tutors who were external architects, who were architects practicing in industry or architectural designer. And we went through every single student's project, and it is not really easy to do so, having to concentrate on 2 days a week, almost the whole day, looking at the students presenting and commenting on it. And also there were times when it was desk tutorial or desk crits. But in a 14 weeks long semester, we would have studio pinups and interim crits. So meaning that maybe 4 and 4. So out of those 14 weeks, 8 to 9 weeks, there were days that were full. Now, it's quite intense. So then we came up with the formula of concentrating on themes and particular sites later to get the learning done, because the learning need to be done. And at the design thesis, we need to tweak it so that it is a design thesis project. You can't have students doing the same site usually. Not that I can think of any, in a year, there is no student doing the same site. Except for 1 year, I think, and that was a problem. That was experimental. So what transpired was, in this particular university, when I first came in, before I became the design thesis tutor, in 1997, when they started the Part 2 course, the last 2 years, with the 4th year and the 5th year, they had people manning the design thesis who are practitioners, who were clearly, they were on contract as a full-time academician, but in reality they were practicing outside. They were good at their job, and the students were suitably were in an atelier sort of situation where they were learning from them one way, one approach. They were coach on taking specific sites and specific typologies. In my opinion, I'm trying to recall exactly what was it. Students of architecture will come up with their topic, and the group of architects, academicians, coach them to a certain style. It was also stylistic for that. 97, 98, 99, 2000. I think around 2000, 2001, they were not teaching at that level anymore. The group of architects, academician, it became more of it is not stylistic. It's not like the agenda is very specific, what sort of design. Later on, they were still maintaining that the students find their own topics. And people from industry comes in, and there's still debate. And it continued when I was the design tutor for the 5th year design thesis. And we continued with that. And eventually in the year 2016, after it became a Masters of Architecture course, it was split into units because we receive, or we allowed more number of students. Previously it was like maximum 24. Now it becomes 40 something, maybe 45. So there are 3 units usually in the design thesis here. There are more number of students being, the intake is more. The school had dabbled with supervisor system, where the lecturer, the academician is coaching the student. I don't know what this belief comes from, that academicians, full-time academicians are good enough to supervise students of architecture. And if they have a part-time lecturer with them, the latest was, they call it the lab system, and still academicians interested to be in the design thesis, but they say they're interested, but they're not, because in theory, everybody could do it, but when it is practice, the effect is not as what one intended it to be, because simply there is no practice experience. The person with the practice experience is fresh, you see. They have a lot of ideas because they're not encumbered or drowning in trying to do ISI journals or publications day in, day out. They come from the industry where they're doing the practice and nitty-gritty of the industry. So they are really wanting to share or to facilitate the student of architecture to explore their own story, to explore their own research in terms of design thesis. So if you have like one academic and one practitioner together in a unit you have about 10 to 12 people. The academic is leading the unit, would be a disadvantage, really, because it becomes too much formulaic, too much based on guidelines, too much based on requirements, whereby we know that you don't coach students of architecture with some military precision, or maybe, with like a bureaucratic angle where every now and then you're reminding the student to follow the rules, like, oh, make sure your building is 2 stories. I mean, this is not conceptual. This is limited. This is tying them, handcuffing them literally, okay, metaphorically at the back, Their thoughts are strangled. I mean, this is very uncomfortable, and to say the least. So we'd want the student to be able to, within the structure, explore and be having the freedom to learn more and more. And if you have the practitioner, there's 2 of them, right? The academic and the practitioner. If you have the practitioner leading in terms of visioning for that unit, how we're gonna, what are the, they know, the practitioner, like Kevin Matlow, he'll mention to the student, okay, we got to, whatever it is, we got to follow the rules. You have to have a certain height of the building, and okay, it could be, they would have to think about it in that way, but they are free to lead and see, because it's to do with concepts and designs, and it's to do with something that the practitioner has encountered with in the past a lot, like master planning, or it has to do with housing, or it has to do with different sectors, or it has to do with design detailing or design problems in practice. So the academician their experience is limited, because I'm talking about myself as well. My experience is limited. I would not be wanting to lead a unit. Now, I could lead a unit, but it's limited in terms of the students' enjoyment. Because it's always better when you're working in a team and the team works very well. So this idea to limit the students' enjoyment in pursuing their desire to discover more of architecture is very, shall I say, evil. I mean, it's diabolical evil. It's like, why? Because this is the best time for them to explore in the 5th year, when they're not encumbered by technical projects. The reason why this particular school decided to have the technical projects of high-rise and housing in the year before the design thesis was so that the design thesis could be something to be explored. And the enjoyment of collaborating. Another thing is, when I interviewed the Kampong Kerinci batch, especially, and also the PJ Old Town batch, after they have graduated, whether collaboration is a good thing, and all of them said that collaboration is a good thing, and from the range of 50-50, meaning the students independently works on the project 50% of the time, and the other 50% is in collaboration with the group of tutors, or 70-30, meaning 70% of it is independently their work. So it's never less, they're never less than 50 that they work on it. So the idea that the student work 100% on their work and just receiving a little bit of advice, it could happen. But how happy are they? Because the students said that they're very happy at 50-50. Because this is a process of learning. And they learn from the industry players. They learn from the architects practicing outside, who want them to be architects. So 5th year, you've committed to going into Master of Architecture Part 2. you've decided that you want to be an architect. Whether or not you will later on is something else. But a journey is not cast in stone. If it's a stone, it is like a geological formation of human character, how they would processed. And there's a lot of fire in order to change. A lot of fire needed to change. A lot of energy needed to change someone, obviously. So different students are different constituents or consistence or consistency is one thing, constituent is another, or ingredients. Each student is made of different stuff, basically. So I would like to conclude this episode, which is what I talk about when I talk about design thesis. Maybe this is part 1. So thank you very much for listening. Time's running out. Take care.